Combat Shock is a gritty, low-budget film by Buddy Giovinazzo. It had a brief theatrical run when it first came out in the mid-80s, but went largely unseen until it was picked up for distribution by Troma Entertainment. You might know Troma primarily for producing the B-movie masterpiece The Toxic Avenger, amongst many others. The film opens with a Vietnam War flashback narrated by main character Frankie, who is portrayed by the director's brother Ricky Giovinazzo. Frankie shoots an unarmed woman before throwing down his gun and fleeing into the jungle. I mean, it's not much of a jungle, it's probably like a park or some shit, but whatever, I'm down to pretend it's a jungle. Frankie comes upon a clearing littered with corpses and is captured by the Viet Cong. We jump to present day. Frankie wakes up in his hideously dingy apartment to the sound of his baby crying. His wife nags him about a bunch of little problems like being broke, not having any food, their terrible living conditions, broken toilet. Frankie comments that he's not even certain that their baby is his. The wife says,
"Only you could have created this."
Bullshit! They said it was inconclusive.
If I had to guess, I'd say the father is actually Skeletor from the 1987 He-Man movie. The implication is that the baby is all fucked up because Frankie was exposed to something in Vietnam. We can assume they're talking about Agent Orange or some other comparable thing, although it's not stated explicitly. We lead into another flashback with the sound of a dripping faucet and a bunch of super quick cuts. We see Frankie lying in a hospital bed being examined. They look at what appear to be track marks from drug use on his arm. Back in the present day, Frankie heads out and wanders the street to a funky beat. He then gets dragged into an alley by some thugs and... whoa. Uh-oh. Let's take a look at this guy. He must have gotten lost on the way to audition for the band Saxon and then fell in with a rough crowd. Anyways, the leader here, Paco, says Frankie owes him money, so him and his goons beat him up and then take off. Next up, this junkie with a gun tries to hold Frankie up before he recognizes him and then apologizes. He asks Frankie for money, but naturally that doesn't pan out for him. So Frankie continues his meandering journey, and he recites some lighthearted poetry.
Sometimes I feel like I'm oozing out of my body, like I don't belong here. And my mind forces me somewhere else.
We flash back to Vietnam again and now see Frankie as a POW, imprisoned in a small wooden box. He remembers a funny chat he had with his dad back in the day in an attempt to cope.
You can't judge everybody by their color.
And don't tell me how to live. You're not going to be seen hanging around with niggas.
Back in real life, Frankie's buddy heads to Paco to try and score some heroin. He sells him some cheap jewelry and then tries to pawn his gun as well, but is turned down. He gets a small bag of heroin, but he's got no syringe to shoot up with, or hardware as they call it in the biz. Meanwhile, Frankie finally makes it to the unemployment line with this group of upstanding citizens.
Yo, baby, you wanna take me to Bayonne? I already got my will.
Whew, I don't know how this woman is able to resist the flirtations coming from a group of unemployed bums, but her will is strong. The junkie, unable to locate any hardware, settles on a slightly less glamorous method of intravenous drug use, and carves a hole in his arm with a rusty coat hanger, then ever so delicately sprinkles the heroin in. Frankie manages to make it into the unemployment office and is given some great advice by this guy.
Life is hot, Frankie, and because it is hot, I am compelled to remove my jacket.
But unfortunately, he is not able to secure a job. So, feeling dejected, Frankie decides to give his old dad a call. Frank and Papa have a pleasant little catch-up.
I've lost everything. The business, my savings, and now my health.
What? But how?
I'm waiting to die.
Well, Frankie's life doesn't seem to be on the upswing. Let's check on his buddy. Oh no. Things are going even worse for him. And, to add insult to, death, this lady steals his gun. Frankie begins his slow walk home when he bumps into this adorable child prostitute. He decides to help her get out of this horrible and abusive lifestyle, and they form a friendship that will last forever, a reward more valuable than any material wealth. Nah, just kidding. Her pimp roughs him up and sends him on his way. Frankie's desperation reaches a new level and he decides to mug this lady. She has it coming though, she stole his buddy's gun. I mean, he doesn't know that, but still. So he snatches her purse and takes off. She cries for help and thank goodness Paco and the boys show up to chase Frankie down. After a lively pursuit, the 80s metal goon catches Frankie and gives him a low-effort beatdown. He rips the purse out of Frankie's hand and the gun falls out and lands next to Frankie, but the goon doesn't notice. He hands the purse over to Paco, who dumps it out and finds nothing of value. Frankie then picks up the gun and points it at the boys. He pops greasy Freddie Mercury in the stomach. Metal Goon tries to take off but gets one in the back. Now Paco's so nervous that he flubs his line.
Make a deal, see? I won't tell the cops about the other guy's game.
But it doesn't matter. Frankie pops him a few times as well.
Bye, Paco.
So Frankie finally makes it back home to his loving wife and sweet little boo-boo. But for some reason he seems agitated. Alright, at this point in the movie you probably know how it's gonna go, so let's just blaze right through it. Kills wife. Yeah, there she goes. And there goes sweet little boo-boo. And goodbye, Frankie. Well, at least there's a happy ending. So there it is. That's Combat Shock. Man, every time I watch this movie, it stays with me for days after. It's not even the story or the bleakness. It's just like the overall vibe. Every location and every person in this movie is just so dirty and disgusting. It makes you want to take a bath after watching. But ultimately, it's hard to even call this a B movie, although I can see why its budget and subject matter would lead people to label it as such. But it's well above the caliber of the typical B movie. It's a very well put together film. There's not a lot of unintentionally laughable moments. I mean, the appearance of the baby might make a person laugh, but even though the thing looks kind of silly, I think you quickly forget that because it's definitely not being played for laughs. The acting feels a bit stilted from time to time, and some of the dialogue can be clunky, but there's nothing that took me out of the narrative. I think Ricky Giovinazzo's performance as Frankie was quite strong. He's an awkward and stiff character, and the performance is definitely unusual. Now, this could be seen as a byproduct of Ricky's lack of acting experience, or it could be seen as a deliberate choice. Either way, I think Ricky's unconventional performance helped contribute to the feeling that this character is barely clinging to his sanity. The plot works well. There's a tasteful use of flashbacks that help illustrate Frankie's deteriorating mental state. We get a good sense of the pain he's endured, and it only helps us to empathize with his struggle. There's also a really interesting cast of over-the-top side characters. Thugs, junkies, prostitutes. All of these people, as well as the locations, keep us firmly locked into Frankie's world. It's a bleak and depressing world, and this film shoves it right in the audience's face. It feels tough, gritty, and totally unapologetic. I honestly don't have a lot of bad things to say. It's a simple movie, maybe a little slow, maybe a little predictable, but it's an immersive experience, and I think open-minded viewers will really enjoy this strange and unpolished piece of filmmaking. Interestingly, director Buddy Giovinazzo would go on to decent mainstream success. His next feature film after Combat Shock was 1996's No Way Home, starring Tim Roth, and he's done a lot of television work in recent years. Buddy's brother Ricky not only starred in Combat Shock, but also did the music for the film. Clearly this was where his true passion was, as to this day, Combat Shock is Ricky's only acting credit. But he has a whopping 173 IMDb credits as part of the music department on a variety of different projects, including X-Men, Days of Future Past, Transformers: The Last Night, and The Call of the Wild. It's a seriously impressive resume. So, here's to Combat Shock, for kickstarting two impressive careers, and for still holding up all these years later.